He's one of the most hated men in history.
He suffered very much from paranoid personality disorder.
Certainly, he had a reputation for being bloodthirsty and ruthless.
Most people know him from a brutal Bible story, the Massacre of the Innocents. But his bloody reputation hides another side of King Herod the Great. He was an architectural mastermind.
He is the single most important person in the archaeology of the land of Israel. He left an architectural imprint that is still visible today.
From his imagination sprang fortresses, temples, and cities so audacious they astound architects and engineers today. But Herod left a riddle that has remained unsolved. Where did he build his own tomb? A decade ago, archaeologists thought they'd found it. It was called the greatest archaeological discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls.
This is where I lift my hands and say, wow, we have it.
But now, new research may be turning this discovery on its head.
It is impossible, inconceivable. This could not be the resting place of Herod the Great.
It's time to reopen the case of Herod's tomb. A reputation for bloody murder has always overshadowed another legacy of the King of Judea in the time of Christ. Herod changed the landscape of the Holy Land by building many of its masterpieces of architecture. Masada, an ancient fortress high atop a soaring mountain stronghold. Herod had the vision to transform it into a luxurious palace complex that seemed to defy gravity. Jerusalem's Second Temple. It was part of one of the largest sacred complexes of its time. To keep it pure, it is said Herod trained 1,000 Jewish priests in construction techniques. It was Herod who built its Western Wall, Judaism's most sacred site, and a place of reverence for Muslims and Christians.
He built more monuments, larger monuments, more elaborate monuments than any other person in history.
Herod is absolutely a hands-on person when it comes to the design of these buildings. Herod is not likely to be sitting at a drafting board, but Herod is the mastermind. These projects all have marks of grandeur, imagination, and expansiveness. There is a largeness to them that is quite remarkable.
Finally, there is Herod's memorial to himself, called Herodium, a 50-acre complex Herod engineered for his burial, just 8 miles south of Jerusalem. Herodium consists of a palace fortress in the mountain's crater, and in the valley below, one of the largest palace complexes created anywhere. But here lies a maddening riddle. Somewhere in the sprawling ruin, ancient sources tell us is Herod's tomb. Finding it became the obsession of one man, Hebrew University archaeologist Ehud Netzer.
I came to archaeology from an architectural background. And the fact that became clear to me through the years is that in building, Herod was logical. He had his feet on the ground.
Netzer's fascination with Herod's triumphs of architecture drew him to Herodium and compelled him to take on the quest for Herod's tomb.
Whenever I come back to Herodium, there is something overwhelming in the site. The grandeur of the site, and in particular the hill.
It was on that hill that Netzer's team made a discovery that would rock the archaeological world. On the side of Herodium's mountain, the searchers uncovered the ruins of a monumental structure. They found the richly decorated remains of what looked like a mausoleum. And even more exciting, pieces of an ornate red sarcophagus, or coffin.
It was terrific to uncover it, to get the feeling that we really have it.
But did they really have it? Was it too soon to claim this was the tomb of King Herod the Great? Netzer's team hadn't yet found a name inscribed anywhere. And mysteriously, the sarcophagus they believed was Herod's seemed to have been deliberately smashed into hundreds of pieces. Learning who destroyed it and why could provide clues to help verify Herod's resting place. Team member Raquel Chachi tried to make sense of the pieces.
It's for sure a puzzle. There are so many elements, and every day can bring some other detail, that it's as if every day you have to reconstruct your own idea about the monument.
To solve this monumental mystery, Netzer's team got help from the first-century historian, Flavius Josephus. Thanks to this Jerusalemite, more is known about the life of Herod than any other major character in the New Testament, including Jesus. Netzer's team was led almost to the door of Herod's tomb itself by one event teasingly described by Josephus. The Judean desert, around 4 BC. One of the world's most powerful men, Rome's appointed King of the Jews, is dead. Though Jewish by faith, Herod was an Arab by blood. Critics called him a half-Jew and said he stole the throne like a fox, ruled like a tiger, but died like a dog. He died despised and probably insane, but not before planning a lavish farewell to a nation glad to see him go. Josephus wrote,
"The bier was of gold, studded with precious stones. On this lay the body, wrapped in a purple robe. A crown encircling the head, the scepter beside his hand. Around the bier were a group of his relations. These were followed by the guards, Germans and Gauls, all equipped for war. The body was thus conveyed in accordance with the directions of the deceased. So ended Herod's reign."
And so ended Josephus's description. The funeral goes to Herodium, but the historian doesn't reveal the tomb's location. Nearly 2,000 years later, Ehud Netzer was determined to fill in the blanks. He figured if he could locate the place where the mourners gathered, he'd likely find the tomb nearby. A building at Herodium's far edge piqued his curiosity. It's called a triclinium, a room for eating, talking, and mourning. Triclinia often appear in funerary sites.
These places were used for meals after the burial or when people came to visit.
Netzer sensed he was near the tomb.
We excavated it about 30 years ago with a lot of enthusiasm.
Details in every structure the team exposed told them they were looking at a burial compound on a Herodian scale. And yet, after countless digs, they found no sign of the mausoleum.
When we finished the triclinium and nothing came, it was a frustration. We explored a room next to the triclinium, and it was empty. So this was another stage of concentrated frustration.
But that didn't stop Netzer. His pursuit went on for decades. Finally, in 2006, he had a fateful insight into the mind of the builder king. That insight led his team up Herod's Mountain and into archaeological history. Herod worked closely with architects and engineers to make sure they properly executed his grand designs. One of his most innovative projects was Herod's Mountain, a monument to his engineering genius. This is a mountain that was actually man-made. Stone quarried from one hill went into building a palace on the adjoining hill, and earth filled in a cone around the top. This flattened the neighboring hill, while making Herodium's man-made mountain soar 330 feet above the desert. Under Herod's direction, workers built the mountain and palace complex in just a few years. Archaeologist Yaakov Coleman has excavated at Herodium for decades.
Physically, I can really relate it to them and understand how hard the work is. Working in the heat of the day and carrying baskets of dirt and stones, it's difficult work. I can feel the hardness of the work there.
Manufacturing the mountain might have been the easy part. The biggest challenge must have been the opulent castle perched atop the mountain. This pleasure palace was made of gleaming white stone that could be seen all the way from Jerusalem, 8 miles away. Here Herod could entertain his friends in the high style of his patrons in Rome. Once, this was a luxurious temperate sauna.
The room is part of the bathhouse. What's special about it is the way it's been built. It has a dome on it, which is the first time we actually see a dome in Israel.
This, the oldest dome yet found in Israel, was probably built using a wooden frame. On it, workers laid stones carefully cut to evenly distribute their weight. Then, they took the frame away. While it boasted the luxuries of a pleasure palace, the mountain's double walls and enemy-spotting towers are hallmarks of a fortress. But why build his hybrid complex far from civilization in the harsh Judean desert? For a very personal reason. Herodium was the site of the one battle that changed the life of the man who would be king.
To understand why Herod chose Herodium as the site of his everlasting memorial to himself, his tomb, you have to understand what happened at the beginning of his reign.
It was 40 BC. Judea was under Roman rule. Herod wasn't yet king. He was a Rome-supported governor, known for a hot temper and quick sword. That year, Parthians, from modern-day Iran, invaded Judea and took Jerusalem from the Romans. With his family and army, Herod made a risky nighttime escape. It wasn't like him to run from a fight, but he was outnumbered. His plan was to return with Roman legions. Suddenly, the wagon carrying Herod's mother overturned. Herod believed she had perished and considered joining her in death. But their pursuers were upon them. Instead of killing himself, Herod led the defining battle of his life. Against all odds, he defeated his enemies. And on this site, he vowed to build his palace, Herodium.
And he perhaps made a vow to be buried here. So this is how it started.
His mother survived, but Herod's victory was short-lived. His enemies regrouped and pursued him, so he retreated further south to a place called Masada, a fortress he would later transform into an astonishing feat of engineering of a totally different kind. Masada comes from the Hebrew word for fortress, but to the Jewish people, it means more. Over a century after Herod found sanctuary here, Jewish rebels made a heroic but futile last stand against Judea's Roman occupiers. In 40 BC, Herod came to Masada from a victorious battle. But to win the war, he'd need legions from his masters in Rome.
So we pick up the story in a very critical moment in his career. He fled Jerusalem, he won at Herodium. What to do next? Where do you go from there? I think the best solution was Masada.
He left his mother and other family members at this sky fort, then went to get reinforcements. But while he was gone, Masada's cisterns ran dry.
They were trapped here. They ran out of water. They were surrounded by the Parthians. He could have lost everything.
Just when surrendering would mean certain death, rain came to the rescue.
All the water cisterns were filled, and they could survive until he came back as a king and rescued them. And I think the road to glory, the yellow brick road, was paved for him ever since.
Herod wouldn't forget his family's suffering at Masada. Instead, he'd transform it into an engineering marvel.
Stone speaks at Masada. If I look at Masada, and I want to give you an example how archaeology, how stones reflect the psychic, the state of mind of the king, we can look at the overdoing of the oversize of the water cisterns. He constructed a huge system of water cisterns containing an amount of millions of gallons of water, 40,000 cubic meters, enable him to sustain an army of 10,000 soldiers for a period of several years of siege.
Herod's 20 cisterns held about 10.5 million gallons of water, as much as 16 Olympic-sized swimming pools. To keep them full, he had to capture the desert's infrequent rains.
We're actually walking in the original remains of the upper aqueduct of King Herod the Great here at Masada. You can see the actual channel, the plaster that held the water.
Workers carved channels into the plateau. These guided precious rainwater along the mountains and into the cisterns. His water supply secure, Herod turned to life's finer things and engineering novelties that are still surprising today. This room stored large containers of wine imported from Italy. If an urn broke, the wine would spill into vessels below the holes.
You can replace your servant, but not your precious wine. That's priorities of the king. We're standing, I think, in one of the greatest achievements of King Herod the Great, in the terraced palace, the hanging palace in the northern part of Masada. One of the greatest examples for the architectural vision and accomplishment of the king.
Herod's crowning achievement at Masada is the three-tiered palace on its northern face.
He takes advantage of an already existing natural mountain, which is quite dramatic in and of itself. And on top of it, he situates a palace that literally hangs over the edge of the cliff. So it's a brilliant marriage of architecture and landscape.
For me, Masada is a reflection of the entire reign of King Herod the Great. Masada was built throughout his reign.
And throughout his tempestuous reign, Herod returned again and again to improve and enjoy his sanctuary in the sky.
You have the breeze at night coming even in the hottest days. You can just imagine the king sitting here with one of his beloved, drinking red wine coming from south of Italy, enjoying life. It's good to be a king.
It's good if you live to enjoy it. To make sure he did, Herod built not one rock wall, but two around Masada's perimeter.
One wonders why to build such a wall on a sheer cliff like that, presumably reflecting the state of mind of the king.
Herod was preparing for a siege.
We don't have to guess about why Herod built Masada, because in fact Josephus tells us that Herod fortified Masada because of fears of an internal Jewish revolt against him.
Josephus wrote,
Herod prepared this fortress for fear of the multitude of the Jews, lest they should depose him and restore their former kings to the government.
Herod had been appointed king of Judea by the Romans, by an outside power. So in the eyes of the Jews, he wasn't a legitimate ruler. And he wasn't descended from the native Jewish line of kings, the Hasmonean line.
In 40 BC, Herod had fled Jerusalem a governor, but returned a king. The Roman rulers, Mark Antony and Augustus, had named Herod King of the Jews. In 3 years, Herod drove the Parthians out of Judea and crushed their supporters, his future Jewish subjects. They never forgave him for ravaging the country, nor for the family murders that marred his reign, and probably inspired one of the best-known and most terrifying episodes in the New Testament, the Massacre of the Innocents. The Gospel of Matthew's famed account tells of the 3 wise men searching for the baby Jesus. Their quest alerted Herod the Great to the birth of the newborn king of the Jews. Fearing a usurper, Herod ordered all Bethlehem's male children under 2 years murdered. The Gospel was written nearly a century after the birth of Christ, and many scholars questioned the veracity of the account. But that doesn't mean the massacre wasn't in character.
Matthew's depiction of Herod as being somebody who would slaughter innocent children does have a factual basis in the sense that Herod is known to have killed or had murdered his own family members.
To strengthen his ties to the throne, Herod married a princess from Judea's ruling dynasty, the Hasmoneans.
Herod apparently tried to marry his way into the Hasmonean line by marrying a Hasmonean woman named Mariamne, who, as it turns out, had a tragic end.
Herod was determined no other man would have her. Whenever a dangerous mission called him away, he left secret orders for her to be killed should he not return. But then, the confidant Herod entrusted with the command told her of the king's plans. Herod had him killed. And later, his beloved wife. Now, the major threats to Herod's throne were his own Hasmonean sons.
Members of the household were spreading rumors about them, that they were not loyal to Herod, that they were plotting to take over, that they were plotting to do away with him. So Herod also had them put to death.
It's not a natural way to think about father killing his own sons. It's abnormal. He killed them all, killed them all.
Herod's gift for inspiring hostility was unmatched. And in 20 BC, he was about to give some of his people another monumental reason to detest him. It started with a battle that changed the course of history, Actium. And Herod bet it all on the loser. For years, Mark Antony had been Herod's chief Roman supporter. That abruptly ended when he and his co-ruler, Caesar Augustus, fought a famous naval battle off the coast of Greece.
The Battle of Actium then is a real turning point for Herod, because until the Battle of Actium, Herod's fortunes had been tied to Mark Antony.
Mark Antony lost, and Herod's future seemed to sink with him. But if Herod had anything going for him, it was ego and nerve.
Herod decides to chase directly off to Augustus. He goes to meet him. It's an act of great, not only courage, but of chutzpah, imaginatively confronting Augustus. And he says to him, in effect, I was loyal all these years to Mark Antony. Now I will turn and I will be loyal to you.
And then to show his loyalty to Augustus, Herod built a couple of monumental cities in his kingdom and named them in honor of Augustus. And one of those is the city of Caesarea Maritime, Caesarea on the sea.
It was a classic act of Herodian hubris, a monumental feat of architecture that would secure his future and further alienate his people.
Caesarea Maritime is a whole city and an enormous harbor. The object was to bring trade through Judea. And in this, he had a major economic impact on the region.
The city that filled Judea's coffers pleased the Romans and disturbed many Jews. That's because Caesarea was a pagan playground, filled with all the amenities a Roman abroad might enjoy. A hippodrome, or athletics and chariot races. A Roman-style theater for the performing arts. And a distinctly non-Jewish pagan temple to Rome and the city's namesake, Caesar Augustus. The Romans were delighted, but the Jews were not. So Herod set out to change his negative image, starting with his most ambitious project to date, expanding the Great Temple in Jerusalem. This is Judaism's most sacred site, the western wall of the Second Temple complex, destroyed by Rome about 70 years after Herod's death. Some come to the western wall to mourn the temple's destruction. Others to celebrate life with weddings and bar mitzvahs. The wall is almost all that remains of Herod's attempt to convince his subjects of his own religious fervor.
Herod was clearly trying to win the favor of the Jews.
Herod wanted to build a temple to his God, to show that the God of Israel, the God of Judaism, outranked, in his view, all those Roman gods.
As Herod envisioned it, the Second Temple would be one of the largest sacred complexes of its time, dwarfing the mightiest pagan shrines of Rome. Its courts, galleries, and the temple itself occupied a platform measuring about 1.5 million square feet, equal to about 27 football fields. With the temple today all but gone, the ingenuity of Herod's plans lies in underground tunnels. This is the largest building stone ever discovered in Israel. It's 42 feet long, 11 feet high, and 14 feet deep. It weighs a staggering 660 tons. Scientists have determined this stone came from a quarry just miles from the Second Temple site. Cut blocks left behind suggest a massive stone harvesting operation that yielded the temple monoliths. First, with hammers, chisels, and wedges, workers separated blocks from limestone bedrock. The next step, masterfully engineered Roman cranes hoisted the blocks onto wagons or rollers. From here, they went straight to the temple. Of Herod's last and most sacred monument, Jewish priest conceded, "He who has never seen the temple of Herod has never seen a beautiful building." Yet Herod himself would never witness its ultimate beauty. He died about 16 years after the first temple stone was set in place, long before it was completed. And he chose Herodium as his burial place. But his tomb seemed to vanish, leaving one of the great archaeological riddles of all time. In 2006, Ehud Netzer and his team were once again searching for Herod's lost tomb. They followed an architectural treasure map that pointed to the Eastern Tower as a likely spot. From ceramic evidence, the team knew people had lived in Upper Herodium's palace after Herod's burial. But burials contaminate living quarters, according to Jewish law. So Netzer concluded the tomb couldn't be in the Eastern Tower, but it might be below. Looking for an entrance in the hillside, the searchers uncovered a large wall and probed beneath it.
This wall is very important. This wall is actually the one that brought us here. And down below here, we can see the structure of the burial. It's all in front of you.
Workers began pulling sarcophagus fragments from the rubble. Once the pieces reached the lab, a skeptical Raquel Chachi grew increasingly convinced they had found Herod's tomb.
I kept on running from one room to the other every time. I'm sorry to interrupt you again with the work, but look at this, look at this.
This is where I lift my hands and say, wow, we have it.
But to convince the doubters, Netzer's team had to line up all the evidence. When they did, it looked irrefutable. First, the tomb and its 3 sarcophagi are royal in quality. 2 white coffins and 1 red were found. The most ornate is the red one, fit for a king. The 2 white ones likely entombed Herod's family members. Second, the complex in which the tomb was found is the only one in Judea named after Herod. And we know from the historian Josephus that Herod was buried here, somewhere. Third, the question of why the red sarcophagus was smashed was addressed after the team found new evidence from the mausoleum. The building stones revealed something unusual for an ancient structure, marks left by tools, indicating minimal exposure to the environment.
The tool marks are still visible. You see the hammers, the chisels, everything that was used. Normally when a building stands for a long time, these tool marks will become less and less visible. The fact that they are so visible gives the feeling that the building was not standing for hundreds of years. Maybe 50 years, maybe 60 years, but not more.
Looking at what happened about 60 years after Herod's death, the timing is almost perfect. Herodium was then occupied by Jewish rebels, trying to drive Rome from Judea. And no one detested Herod's memory more. The rebels had the motive to destroy Herod's tomb, and would likely have concentrated their anger on the sarcophagus they knew, or believed was his. The red, most royal one. Finally, Herod was the only known Judean worthy of such a lavish burial about 60 years before the demolition of the tomb. It all added up. It was time to announce their findings to the world.
An Israeli archaeologist says he has made a historic find.
Jerusalem, May 2007.
We found what we believe and have no doubt evidence and remains of Herod's tomb.
It was called the greatest archaeological discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Monuments in Judea.
And yet, the story didn't convince everyone. Without an inscription bearing Herod's name, the team's evidence was still circumstantial. Now, more than a decade after the discovery, some scholars are stepping forward, poking holes in the theory of Herod's tomb and sparking a new debate. Dr. Joseph Patrick, an archaeologist and former student of Ehud Netzer, believes Herod would never have built a tomb for himself like this one.
This is impossible. So the argument is the size. This is not a royal size. It is inconceivable. This could not be the resting place of Herod the Great.
The discovery of Herod's tomb at Herodium stands the test of time because it is true. This is the tomb.
If a tomb was found, it doesn't mean that this is Herod's. Herod's tomb may still be hidden. Or it might have disappeared.
After Ehud Netzer discovered what he believed was Herod's tomb, he continued to work at Herodium, searching for more artifacts. Even at age 76, he seemed unstoppable. Then, one day while on the site, a railing collapsed and he fell 18 feet down a steep hill and died from the injuries.
Ehud Netzer was my professor as an undergraduate, and his death in 2010 was as tragic as it was unexpected. The only positive thing I can say out of it is that somehow it seems right that he would have met his end here at Herodium, where he spent so many years exploring the site and bringing to light Herod's palaces.
Now, in his absence, his students and colleagues are defending or opposing the legitimacy of his discovery. Dr. Joseph Patrick wanted to prove to his former teacher that the tomb is yet to be found.
Unfortunately, I didn't have a time to talk with him about my doubt.
Patrick's doubts start with the coffin itself. He believes it should have been made from elaborately decorated marble, in keeping with the coffins of the Roman leaders Herod emulated.
Now, this reddish sarcophagus that was uncovered is impressive indeed, but it is not royal. And the tomb itself, the mausoleum here, is impressive, but this is not royal.
For Dr. Jody Magnus, this coffin is plenty royal. She firmly stands behind her late professor's discovery.
That red sarcophagus was the sarcophagus or the coffin of Herod himself because it is of exquisite workmanship. It's beautifully decorated and carved.
They're relatively simple. They're not from marble. But Herod, in his funeral, was brought to burial in a litter of gold with gems, decorated with expensive gems.
And in antiquity, the color red or purple was associated with royalty.
Even if red is royal, that doesn't explain the mystery of the central stairway. Joseph Patrick claims there was no royal way to see the royal tomb.
On the west, you see this triangular wall is the wall of the staircase, a very monumental staircase that leads where to? Not to the royal mausoleum. It leads up to the top of the mountain, skipping, bypassing the royal burial ground. How come? And then, where was the entrance to this place? Where? You cannot see it.
There had to be some sort of an access into it, right? So how do you gauge today, now, 2,000 years after Herod's time, who are we to say that the access that's there is appropriate versus not appropriate? How do we know what Herod thought was appropriate or not appropriate? That's not how we do scholarship.
If I think there is a serious mistake, I should point what is wrong with this identification. This is the idea.
It's not just the coffin and the staircase that seem odd to Patrick, but the size of the area surrounding them. It doesn't square with Josephus's account of the funeral.
The burial grounds, it is so small, it could accommodate maybe less than 100 people. In the funeral, the participants of the funeral was 18,500 people. Where could they stand? Where could they see the last phases of the procession? It is impossible here. And where they reach this place, it is impossible.
It's not small. The monument is not small because the whole mountain is the monument. So the mausoleum is part of a much larger complex.
The mausoleum and the mound are completely different entities. They should not be connected.
And this is one of the main points of contention. Did Herod see the whole mountain as his burial monument? Or is the burial tomb just one part of the whole? The scholars may never agree on the answer. But what they do agree on is that Herod's tomb is here, at Herodium. Patrick thinks the coffins that were uncovered were for Herod's relatives. The king's, he says, is yet to be found.
The big question is, where is the tomb?
He suspects the entrance is in Lower Herodium, near a large pool, where the crowds would have had enough room to gather for Herod's funeral.
The only possibility for such a multitude to assemble is here.
This was the same area Ehud Netzer once excavated in search of the tomb, to no avail. Patrick is determined to dig further until he finds it. But after all this time, new excavation, and doubts, Netzer's team remains confident the tomb found in 2007 is indeed Herod's.
When he built his tomb here, what Herod was saying is, this is how I want you to remember me forever.
Work goes on at the tomb that many scholars claim was once demolished to punish Herod for his brutal ways. So too, it seems, was Herod punished in life. He died at the age of 67, racked by a half-dozen excruciating ailments. Josephus suggests he had already been driven insane. In death, even as he was carried to his final resting place, Herod's legacy would begin to play out as stories of unbridled violence against a new king of the Jews, against his own family and his own people. Yet it was Herod who left the most impressive architectural legacy in a land that had seen nothing as glorious as what he made. Masada, Caesarea, the Second Temple, and Herodium, where Ehud Netzer's legacy inspires searchers to continue solving the mystery of Herod's ultimate statement, his monument to himself.